and welcome to Season 4 of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, where we share the interesting and inspiring stories of artists, critical thinkers, thought leaders, and art professionals on a wide range of topics about life, work, society, success, failure, and the ways in which we navigate the journey. We share ideas on our inspirations and the influences that affect our lives. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and I look forward to sharing the conversations that I have with artists and creative professionals across the art industry and beyond. As I travel to art fairs, gallery openings, and events within the creative industries both in the U.S. and abroad, join me in discovering and learning about some of today's most interesting and dynamic artists and creative professionals. If you're new to the show, I'm happy to have you here. If you've been on this journey with me, welcome back. Let's get it. On this episode, I'm joined by Paul Anthony Smith. His latest show, Antillean, is on view at Jack Shainman Gallery when we sit down to talk. Paul has just returned from London, where he attended Frieze London and spent time seeing his Jamaican family who lives there. In this episode, Paul reflects on the history of the Caribbean and explores themes of migration. We discussed how photography plays a key role in his work and his use of labor-intensive techniques, such as the hand-scratching method known as picotage, including how becoming a father has changed his perspective on life and creativity. In Antillean, he continues his exploration of the ways in which memory, both personal and historical, can shape the present and fragment the past. This body of work stems from photographs Smith made during Carnival festivities in Trinidad and Tobago from 2020 to 2023. Paul Anthony Smith was born in Jamaica in 1988 and currently lives and works in New York City. Let's dive into my next episode with Paul Anthony Smith, live and direct from Jack Shainman Gallery. Can you introduce yourself with your first last name and however you'd like to describe yourself to the audience?
Hi, I'm Paul Anthony Smith. I'm a visual artist working in New York City, originally from Jamaica, born and raised, and later immigrated to the United States. And a lot of my work really tries to understand the histories that we've been told and the histories that we've learned, but more so how we learn from them and move forward.
I love that you just went straight away and opened up with a bit about what your practice is about. We're lucky enough today to be sitting in Jack Shainman Gallery, where you have your latest solo show on view. And this might be a great time to just dive into some of the things that you're thinking about and some of the ideas that really ground your work more broadly.
My work, I think I'm in my head a whole lot, and I think the things that we see on the wall often reflect my thoughts, and try to create visual languages to really decipher and see what I'm thinking about, because it's so hard to say a lot of the ideas that I have behind the works. Because I was born in Jamaica, moved to the United States in 1997, and I'm often thinking about those small moments where I'm leaving from one country to the other, and why someone immigrate from one land to another land, if it's by force or by pleasure. Nature telling you that you need to move to better support the system that you've created. And for me, it's a mixture of all those things. And so I'm trying to understand it, because in some ways I'm trying to think about my great-grandparents, my great-grandfather, or my grandmother, and oftentimes when you're around family, you hear stories about them, right? And so with this exhibition, Antillean, I'm really thinking more so about the Caribbean people in the Antillean Islands. Before that, the show, my previous exhibition in the gallery was Trade Winds, and before that, it was Junction. So for me, it's like having this thesis of understanding of these people in this region through different times, and really trying to get a sense of the trajectory of them. Whenever I present the Caribbean and the people in my photographs, I'm really trying to highlight the joyful, somewhat resilient nature of who they are, because I want them to live on. I want these stories to continue to be told. If it's not my story, someone else's story, but I want there to be some sort of kinship from seeing familiar images and understanding where those people are coming from and where they're going. I think That's the basis of what I'm thinking of.
No, I love that you shared that. And I think what it's making me think about is a few different things. One is maybe if you'd be comfortable to share some of the reasons why you came to the US and maybe your personal thoughts about the choices and the decision and what you feel that offered you, but also thinking about this drawing this connection and maintaining, maybe more importantly than drawing, but maintaining the connection between folks of the diaspora who live in the Caribbean and folks who migrate to the US in search of what could be many different things, better opportunities or more opportunities, whether by force, to your point, or by choice. But I think it would be great to maybe talk a little bit about you coming here and how you wrestle with that or how you think about that, and also how you think about maintaining the connection between your roots in the Caribbean and the life that you've built here for yourself as an artist, and how that manifests in the visual language that you are creating through your paintings.
That's a good question. I just returned from London yesterday to visit my mom, but also for an exhibition at Frieze Art Fair. And London is always like this playground because I get to see my mom. My mom moved to London a few years after I moved from Jamaica and immigrated to the United States to live with my father in Florida. And that's how I first came here. As a child growing up in Jamaica, I knew I was always going to live in America, but I didn't know when. And when the opportunity came, I went to live with my father and spent the later half of my adolescence with him. When I left high school, I went to school in the Midwest to get a sense of what the American landscape was, because I had no idea of what this idea of landlocked, because I came from the coast. I came from an island. I didn't think there was such a thing that exists, because I was always by the water. My life revolved around the water. A lot of these works revolve around the water. And so doing that, it led me to make a lot of decisions of how I want to live my life and how I move around to see family, whether that be in Toronto, Jamaica, here in New York. My mother and I have some cousins in London, my granduncle still in the UK. And I really tried to understand the reasons why. Everyone, beginning of life, was in Africa. And so it's like making this quest across the water and just thinking about retracing those steps. I always say that when I used to go back to Jamaica, I had an uncle who would always make these jokes about, do you know that the earth is a sphere? The earth is a globe. And he was always in this drunken language and telling these stories. It was a way to make commentary and joke about Columbus coming to the Caribbean. Did you know Columbus discovered Jamaica or the Caribbean? And it was just funny the way these stories were first told. And you start to wonder, interesting. And what was that like for people living on those islands in the Caribbean? And how did they see Columbus approaching? And then I begin to think, oh, if Columbus never came to the Caribbean, I probably wouldn't be in the Caribbean, because every one of those seconds dictates the future, right? And so if Columbus had failed on this first journey, what would America be? I understand that slavery did exist, and it's a thing that is often brought up. But for me, it's more so like, how could we move past from that? How could we look at that and push forward and think of the cultures that has developed from that, right? The cultures, the languages, the cuisines, the everything, and how to document that in time.
I love that you just mentioned that word time, document in time, because so much of your practice, if not all, is rooted in photography. And so the idea that you are at one point capturing a moment in time, afterwards painting and creating this laborious practice of hand applications and approaching your canvases from a very physical standpoint. So much of the beginning of your work is about capturing a moment in time and then maybe being able to spark so many different types of conversations once that has happened. Can you talk a little bit about being grounded in photography specifically, but also that time element, which I think is so beautiful and also so interesting as we think about history? And you speak about Columbus and Indigenous Peoples Day. It was just earlier this week. And It's now Indigenous Peoples Day. It was formerly Christopher Columbus Day, and a federal holiday that we recognize, but the history of that, of what that even symbolizes, has been convoluted, right? And thinking about being able to record important moments in time through photography, through this particular medium, is also so special.
Yeah, that's a good point. Photography is a contemporary version of painting. I worked on the Hallmark photo collection soon after I left school, and I looked through many images. And for me, I always had images of myself or family members growing up, and I always tried to think about what would it be like to see images like photographs from the 1300s or the 1600s or during the American Revolution. What were those images like? Because we see so many paintings made to capture that history, but a lot of those paintings are made up. And so whenever I think about photography, I think about how it captures time to tell stories. And I use photography as a medium. My paintings just break up the picture plane to get a different sense of how we really decipher these images and really think about them. I'm not a portrait painter, but I'm interested in the abstract nature of photography, of painting over photography. I don't mind creating a truth with this abstract painting. I'm trying to move away from the photography because I think I've come to a point where the photography has taken over so much of the work. I studied ceramics, and that's how I came to the picotage. I was using my ceramic tools to scratch into the photographs, and eventually that became so organized over 10 years that I began picking in to look like halftones, and where I'm able to fade the picking and do a lot of different designs. And it's very laborious. It takes a lot of time. It's like that really investigating the image. How can I use that to disguise a lot of the image, the outer layer, and really create this chameleon texture of how I can make a moving image still, if that makes sense. And really trying to understand. I think whenever I do these shows, I'm really trying to understand what I'm doing. I'll do a show and the work is still in my thought for like years. Did I finish that show? Was that show correct? How can I make another one but better? How could I make more paintings and add to that conversation? Because I think what's interesting about artists is like when you look at their whole career or whole life, it's amazing to watch the trajectory of the early works, the mid-career works, and the later works, and how it all ends and faded out. And I think that's what I'm looking forward to. I have a lot of older works that I see from time to time. I'm like, oh, I wish I had that one because they're very informative in some ways. And whenever I tell collectors or people, I was like, oh, I know that work. That was a good work. They're like, you say that about everything. I'm like, no, I could show you things in that work that led to other works. And so for me, it's about really refining what I'm doing and trying to make the best things. I'm waiting for that time when I make like my best work.
Yeah, I wonder if in saying all of that and sharing your thoughts as a maker and how you approach that, the idea that the best is yet to come and your best works are still inside of you, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be unearthed. And whether that comes through life experience, technique, something that happens, a creative breakthrough, there are all these ways that we access creativity. And so before we switch to some of the more formal elements present in your work, because I really would love to give folks who are listening that visual of what your work really looks like, and we'll go downstairs and walk through the show. But I'm curious, how do you think of your own creativity, and where do you think it comes from? How do you think it impacts your life outside of just being able to say, I'm an artist, right? I make things. How do you think about it in a more deeper way?
That's a very interesting question. I think now I see life differently. I recently became a father a number of years ago, a father to a number of kids. And I think I started to understand life a bit. I see life a bit different. Oftentimes you hold the tears back, but sometimes it's important to let them go and let them out because you need that release. Because there's this joy in seeing these kids. Even when you're so tired and stressed out, you see these kids running around or playing or pouring milk on the floor and looking at you. you just have to be calm. You get tested in all different ways or have to go to the emergency room late at night. And you're just like, this is real life. And so whenever I think about the studio now, I used to be in the studio before, like for long hours during the day, 10 to 10, 11 to 11. And now I'm in the studio 10 to 5. I'm giving that time from 5 o'clock onward to rest so I could come back in, because I have to give part of that day to the kids in the evening. And I try to think more outside of that is, okay, I have to think about the legacy of these kids that I've created. And how do I protect them? How do we care for them? Do I start to grow things? Do I have a farm? Do I have some animals? And then you start to get into these ideas that are, I wouldn't say they're far-fetched, but they're attainable. But how do you maintain them? So that's like where I'm thinking creatively.
So it sounds like you're saying that your family and your family life and the incredible transformation from which you can never, like, you become a father. It's like you can't go back, right? So like, it sounds like what you're saying is that your family life and the incredible experience of becoming a father is really a place where you're accessing your creativity right now. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think that's where it is. It's like family life, wife, kids, weekends off, go to the park. My grandfather had 12 kids. And so I have all my aunts and uncles from my grandfather in my studio door. And I always look at them. I'm like, how did he do this? And here I am with 3. And I feel like I'm struggling. And my grandfather came from Cuba. And so a lot of these works also, the Eye for the Tropics work, are also like touching on that. My grandfather came to Jamaica on a ship, and my parents, both my father and mother, worked on a cruise ship back in the 1980s, Royal Caribbean, Song of America. And so I'm always thinking about this beginning. I'm always going back to that thing and trying to understand what this life is. Like, how do you cultivate that life? And I guess I made this other body of work called Dreams Deferred, where it's thinking about the American experience and like, how do you maintain an American lifestyle, that American dream, and what it is to, how does it flourish, right? And we have seasons here in America, especially in New York. And I didn't understand seasons until I moved from Miami. And with that, it's, these plants grow again next year. They die off and they grow back. Is that I never saw something like that until like I moved to a colder climate. And now I'm just thinking about how to cultivate this thing to let it keep going and get my flowers while I'm alive with this family, so to speak.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's pulling on a lot of threads for me. One is just you sharing the backstory of your family and how that tells the story of how you got here. Speaking about your grandfather, speaking about 12 kids, speaking about your parents on the Royal Caribbean, and also in the 80s, right? This kind of like far off, distant time. We're both around the same age. So we were born in the 80s, right? But didn't actually live it. Don't really understand the implications of how it got us to where we are today. And so I think in hearing you say that, there's all of the connections that I feel can be drawn that are teased out in the visual aspects of your work, the colors, the plant life, but also the movement and the aliveness of people's bodies in motion, and thinking about the water and being on an island. So there's so many things that I can feel as you share. And then as I look at the work, it's, oh yeah, that's all there. Would I know that off the top? Maybe not, right? But I think that this is a good time for us to pause for a quick second, pop down to the gallery, walk through the show, your latest show on view now at Jack Shainman Antilleans, and let's talk about some works. Sounds good?
Sounds like a plan.
We're back. We're at the beginning of your show, Antillean at Jack Shainman Gallery, and we're looking at the first piece on view, God's Eye, Jamaica 2023. Can we talk a little bit about this work?
Yeah, this image was captured at the sunset below the graveyard where a lot of my family members are buried. And in some ways, it was very difficult to understand what I'm supposed to do with this image. A lot of images I capture I don't really have an idea for them until they're in front of me. And for this one, it made sense to put the sun and moon in the upper right-hand corner. It was also a time when, I think it was like 2 weeks after my grandfather died, but it was like, I wasn't emotionally aware of how to really put it in perspective. And also, Radcliffe Bailey had passed away, and it was like, oh my gosh, it's like death follows death. But it's just one of those works that sometimes you just have to make them. And it's part of the presentation. It's like me also thinking about the beginning of this exhibition. Because out of life, we're lucky to be alive. We're one in a million. And in some ways, we have to really think about how lucky we are to be on this earth and how we get to see with our eyes.
I love that you mentioned Radcliffe and shared and were open enough to share about your grandfather passing, because I think one of the things that I think about often is like how many elders we've lost as of lately. Feels like all of these much older figures. And it's the cycle of life, it happens, but so often, my thought at least, is that when elders pass, if that knowledge has not been passed down that they have, that the knowledge that they carry passes with them, right? And you spoke about being lucky to be alive and being lucky to be here, to have time to raise a family, as we talked about family earlier, to be a father, to have land, to grow food, to do things that enrich your life. But I also think it's interesting to think about knowledge being passed down from elders, and how, while there is that feeling of being so grateful to be here, there's also this incredible grief that I think so many of us are just collectively holding, not only around what's happening in the world these days, but personal loss of family and close figures. I'd like to move on and talk about another piece in the show as we move through the show. This one is titled, At the End of Daybreak, the Parade, Poised with Hunger of Our Past. And what I see here is the flags from the Caribbean that are affixed to the canvas and coming out. We see a lot of these cuts that you use within your pictures that have become part of your visual language as a creator. Can we talk a little bit about this work? One, where do the images come from? And two, your use of the flag?
A few things. Yes, we lose or those close to us, our loved ones. But I think that's why I often try to think about the celebration of life through these images, and I use Carnival as that metaphor. A lot of these titles are taken from Aimé Césaire's Notebook of a Return to the Native Land. And so I'm thinking about that perspective of returning to my native land of Jamaica and understanding how I think, and not just Jamaica, but other Caribbean islands that feel like Jamaica, and which is why I'm using all these flags, is that there's a shared kinship of these islands and the island culture. And this one, at the end of daybreak, the parade poised with hunger of our past. And so again, I'm talking about the past. And so I'm thinking about these people in the procession of the parade and how they're celebrating the history and legacy of what they've been left behind, or left to cope with, if you want to say that. And so I'm thinking very much about those stories. And then I'm using the picotage as this filtration device to block out some images, but also acting as a strainer. In the Caribbean, we drink a lot of tea. I'm thinking about how to design new straining devices to allow for information to get passed through, but also to hold on to certain information, right? And how do you filter that system? How do you filter the legacy? How do you protect it?
Wow, that's really incredible. And I love that we're able to really dig into not only the visual aspects, but thinking towards while making the works. I'd like to move to the final piece that we'll talk about before we wrap. So as we move through the exhibition, we're confronted with more works where we have your picotage and we have the flags present. But I'd like to talk about this piece, Final Hour Gray Area. It's oil and silkscreen on canvas. Can you share a little bit about what's happening in this work? Unlike some of the others, you have a few like this. There are no people present, and it's a natural image depicting a palm tree, but its quality of being void of color and void of human life is interesting and contrasts quite a bit with the other works in the show. Can you talk a little bit about this one?
A lot of these gray area works, I started in 2014, 2015, silk screening collage images on canvas. And with this was one of the most recent one I started in 2017 and recently finished. But it's oil paint on canvas with a silkscreen on top. And the silkscreen is an image of a graveyard. Oftentimes, like I began with a graveyard and someone ending with a graveyard and sunset. And it's thinking about, again, life. We have a sunrise and a sunset, and in between that, it's you got to celebrate life. And the gray area is like this dream state. And in some ways, this dream state is speaking about that magic hour between dusk and dawn before the sun comes up, and what it's like to be on the seashore and really trying to feel those energies. It's these moments where we sleep our best, but it's also where we have the most vivid dreams. And my father used to have this dream book, and a lot of these images of these gray area looks, how the book used to tell you those dreams. And I used to dream a lot. As a child, we had this dream book that we would open up and read, applied the literature to our dreams, right? And so is our go-to after waking up. And that's what I'm trying to emulate in these works. I think a lot about the works that I make. And so I'm trying to give and be open to sharing a lot of those ideas. And the canvas is vertical, but once it's horizontal, you could see a slight image of a graveyard in the background where there's like gravestones. And it's also talking about just like what's on those seashores that we're looking at when we go on vacation.
That was so beautiful, Paul. And thank you for what has been such an incredible episode to speak about Antillean, for us to start with the first work that you are confronted with in the show, and for us to end with one of the last works in the show, and for you to share that it's really a full circle moment happening. Thank you so much. And for everyone out there listening, Paul Anthony Smith Antillean is on view at Jack Shainman Gallery in Chelsea until October 26th. Please come and see the show. And Paul, thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
That was my episode with Paul Anthony Smith. I want to give a big shout out and a big thank you to Paul for joining me on the show. And it's a wrap, folks. That was our episode of Everything is Connected, conversations on culture and current events with some of today's hottest creative contemporaries. These episodes are recorded remotely and on location wherever in the world I find myself, whether that be the US, Africa, Europe, the Middle East, the Caribbean, and more. Depending on where I am at the time of these recordings, you will hear the sights and the sounds of my local environment. I look forward to continuing these wonderful conversations with artists and creative professionals across industries with you. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and we'll see you next time. As always, stay motivated, stay inspired, and stay up. Peace and love, y'all. We out.